And now having the whole BAME taxidermy weirdness in my mind and not being able to talk with Gran about it because she couldn't answer back, I had no idea how much I counted on her opinions until every one of them was taken away from me. And it was like someone had said, "Too bad, Hannah, you lose, and there's nothing you can do about it." And that same rotten, miserable helplessness and frustration and fear came back into my mood, no big and obvious, but grey and seeping. Not even Mr. Slung stopping me in the hall and congratulating me on bringing my grades up and tearing through those mandatory hours, warning me to be careful or I would become a model student and then he'd be left without a challenge, could make me really laugh. I ran into Bow Hunter guy from the property next door on my way home from the bus stop. He didn't have his black knit face mask on, but I still knew it was him from the camo wear and the way he walked, and it left me feeling even weirder because he had a nice face, a regular open face, just like everybody else. And he smiled and said hi when he walked by. I said hi and so much wanted to ask why he didn't care that he was stealing their one chance at life, like I had one chance and he did too. But I didn't because I was afraid he would just call me a Bambi lover like that was a bad thing and then get mad and go kill something extra like a squirrel or some dumps just to pay me back. So I said nothing and just kept the peace, and I hated it. Gran is not well, even for her, she's not well. Grandpa doesn't look so hot either, and then some craphead went and hit one of the stray cats, just left the poor thing lying dead in the road in front of the house, and I had to go out there with a snow shovel and a box and push its poor mangled floppy body inside, carry it into the back, say a prayer and bury it. It was almost a relief to go in, sit down, and hit play. How it ends. At first we called it a run of bad luck, shrugged and kept going. Later we just dug in and took hits as they came. The town reassessed our place and the taxes almost tripled. We appealed and were turned down. We paid them for a while, but they became too much on top of everything else, so we were forced to subdivide the land and sell off the acreage in the back to a nice hard-working family with a child, and later the side acreage as a recreation spot. Money was still an issue. I was laid off, roof needed replacing, and the furnace went. Then out of the blue, Peter had his first heart attack. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and in those 2 weeks I paced holes in every carpet in the house. I hated thinking of him under the care of doctors and nurses. I was terrified they wouldn't be good enough to pull him through. I forced myself into the place, throwing up in the bathroom as the sweet rotten disinfectant smell of the BAMEs clogged my throat. I held his hand and hated how suddenly frail he looked, how his menu was a sick person's menu and his food delivered on a tray, and my God, there were moments when I wanted to grab him up and scream, "Get up, let's get out of here. You know what will happen if we stay." And I'm sure he knew it because he would murmur, "Don't, Louise, I'll be fine. I told you I'd never leave you. Never want to live without you. I mean it. Just give me a little more time and I'll be fine." I would have stayed all night if they'd let me. If he hadn't said, "Go, you've got animals to take care of," and gently tugged loose of my grip, so I would have, jaw like iron. Teeth clenched as I strode down the endless hallway to the door, and I would burst through and then start running through the parking deck to my car and fumble with the keys, climb in, slam the door, and lose it. Nobody ever stops and asks you if you're okay when you're crying in your car on a hospital parking deck. They already know you're not because they're there too, and chances are they're not okay either. I've written our lives as though we had no friends, and that isn't true. We had good friends from work and neighbors who shared their family's joys and woes with us, and we loved them because there was no denying that the lives of those with children was very different from those without. Not better, not worse, just different, with different priorities and schedules and time allowances. So yes, we had friends and loved ones. Never think otherwise. Peter came home a different person, a sad person, quieter than he'd been before, more tentative about how far out of sight of the house he would go, or what kinds of things he'd do at his time off. He was anxious about going back to work and was considering putting in for early retirement until I convinced him to stay out on sick leave for now, and we needed a health insurance. He didn't eat as much, but the good part was that I had already laid down the law and told him his diet was changing. Nothing he could say or do was going to alter that. He just gave me a listless nod, leaned back in the chair, and closed his eyes. "What are you doing?" I said nervously after a moment. "Resting," he said. "Are you okay? Do you have pain?" I went right over and would have put my hand over his heart if he hadn't stopped me. "What?" "I'm fine, Louise," he said. "Why don't you go and find something to do?" "All right," I said, hurt. "I'll bake some low-fat blueberry muffins. You're allowed to have those." He sighed and, swiping a hand across his watery eyes, got up and walked slowly into the living room. Little by little I got him to talk and discovered he was terrified of becoming a burden I couldn't take care of, and that he would rather die than be taken away from me in our home. And all he loved, that his deepest fear was to be put in an institution somewhere, out of sight of the world, because out of sight is where atrocities occur. He didn't want to be left to die in a long, slow, agonizing decline. Hearing him say these things out loud was like reliving an old nightmare that had been dormant for years and now rose again, stretching and showing its teeth, and he began to cry, and that scared me even more because Peter had never been afraid of anything, and now he was, and that alone was reason to fear. I promised him that I would never put him in an institution, and became frightened now too, because although I knew we were older, I had never wanted to think that we were old, and yes, we moved slower and drove slower, had to step out of the way when youth rushed past, even if they didn't see us. Our clunky old computer was still almost as foreign to me as the day I bought it, and there was more we couldn't eat than we could. We had taken to listening to old music, our music, and sitting out on the porch and delighting in the rhythm of the land, because its constant regeneration brought hope and sweet peace. But now his trembling words sparked a dark terror in me too. So I made him promise me the same, no nursing homes, hospitals, or institutions, because I had held captive once, and would never go back. Had seen those nursing home exposés on TV, seen the ruin and the wreckage, and the unwanted and forgotten sitting dull and lifeless on the edges of their beds, food cold and uneaten, limbs mottled blue or red or shiny with burgeoning sores, and the footage had brought back the nauseating scent of decay beneath disinfectant, and I had turned it off, but the scent had lingered in my nostrils for days. I drove him to post-heart attack counseling as often as the insurance would allow, and when it was done, he was diagnosed with depression and put on more medication. His medication was expensive, and insurance didn't cover it all, so I began taking things down to a consignment shop to sell. I went back to the diner and started waitressing again. Cora was gone, but now the owner was still there, and glad to take me back, even if most of the other waitresses were a third my age and cuter than puppies. I felt old and slow and lumbering, with my creaky knees and the anxiety of being away from Peter making me distracted. Still, the trips were a lot better than they had been in the old days, even if so the patrons were more condescending, and the kids smirking brats who left holy messes on the tables for me to clean up. That second stint at waitressing cured me of any lingering regret I'd had at never having children. In the earlier days, we talked about fostering, of course, and even adoption, but Peter had been strangely reluctant, mumbling about through thorough background checks and tracking family histories, and what we were going to say about those, and what if the state home or the police still wanted one or both of us were questioning about what had happened at the Bames. He said by making an adoption application, we put ourselves right back up there on the radar. And did I really want to revisit all of that and maybe have it get out that my parents hadn't been married and I didn't have a high school diploma, and what if we were changed with fraud and asked to pay back years of salaries earned for falsifying job applications, and on until I said, no, you're right, let's just keep it the two of us. I'm happy this way, and he'd breathe this huge sigh of relief, and we lived on from there. Thinking about it now made me wonder all over again, and so when I got home one night and collapsed in a chair, watching as he made me a tuna sandwich on whole wheat with low-fat mayo and a low-sodium pickle, I said, is there any other reason you didn't want to get all involved with background checks, Peter? Is there anything you never told me? And of course there was. During the almost 2 years it had taken Peter to make his way out of Holland after his parents were murdered, throughout all the dark horrors a penniless young man on his own must endure to survive hostile territory, it seems he had done some brutal things while trying to stay alive that were best unclaimed and undisturbed. I'm going to leave them that way too, as, other than making him stronger, they have no real bearing on this story. I'll only add that he's the best person to have at your back, as when he said he wasn't afraid of anything because the worst had already happened, he meant it. We lived small, finding homes for some of the strays because we just couldn't afford to feed them all anymore. Even with the cheapest food, we closed off half the house to avoid having heated, clipped coupons, accepted a new hand-me-down computer from a neighbor when they upgraded, and spent many a frustrating hour learning how to use it. When we'd had enough typing, we walked the property together, put out the deer food in winter, and sat by the pond in spring, and it was during the course of him being frugal and still trying to find me what he called a decent birthday present that he found me the absolute best present of them all. Louise, he said, after I'd blown away too many candles and cut slices of low-fat apple cake for each of us, do you know what ephemera is? No, but good God, Peter, don't tell me you have that too, I said, stopping with my fork halfway onto my lips and staring at him uneasily. He looked different, his eyes were shining, and there was a strange sort of excitement coming off of him in waves. Well, as a matter of speaking, I guess I do, he said, cocking his head and grinning. Then it must not be fatal because you're looking way too pleased with yourself, I said, setting down my fork and sitting up straight, preparing myself for the worst. So are you going to tell me what it is, or do I have to get my medical dictionary? No, I'll tell you. He leaned back in his chair and gave me an extremely smug look. Ephemera is a category on eBay. I gazed at him, wondering if perhaps he'd gone round to the bend. So? And then he explained further how he'd been perusing the categories since we'd gotten our first computer, and even longer, actually, thanks to one of his conductor friends' newfangled new cell phone. With internet access and the searches he'd done and the alerts he'd set up had finally paid off. Ephemera to eBay is old historic paper goods, he said, handing me a flat box wrapped in paper, printed with orchids. Happy birthday, my love, he smiled. Well, aren't you going to open it? I did, hands trembling because I knew it couldn't be it. It just couldn't be, and so I wouldn't even get my hopes up, wouldn't even let the thought cross my mind. Shaking, I lifted the box lid and parted the crisp white tissue paper, and it was. It was. For the first time in almost 50 years, I got to see my mother's smiling face. So I guess you're not going to stick me in some old folks' home and run off with a spry 60-year-old whippersnapper now, he joked, blotting his eyes while I sat there, clutching the faded, rough-edged Ciro's cardboard souvenir photo frame and cried. No, I guess I'm not, I said, burying my face in my napkin. I did good then, he said. Yes, I whispered, you did good. We made love that night for the first time since his heart attack, gently and tenderly and in no hurry, with much care, and afterward he told me the photo had been part of a small lot of the old papers listed as Doctor's Estate Scandal 1950s memorabilia, so he guessed that maybe Nurse, in the course of her cleaning, had found the photo and bundled it into my things. He said he'd found something curious, a piece of correspondence on the state-home letterhead regarding the doctor's pro bono surgeries. Did you know he did operations for the orphanage? He asked, running a lazy finger up and down my forearm. No, I said. I tried to remember why the thought disturbed me, but it was out of reach now, and so I let it go and curled my fingers in his silky, salt-and-pepper chest hair and fell asleep with his arms around me. Peter had a second heart attack 2 years later, and by then I had long suspected there was something seriously wrong with me. Serious enough to make my boss at the diner ask me to quit so he wouldn't have to fire me, but then we compromised and he laid me off so I could at least collect unemployment for a while. I had developed uncontrollable, sporadic tremors, my body moving on its own, and my balance was awful. I was losing track of things, paying bills late, confusing days, months, even years, forgetting to feed the cats, forgetting I had food on the stove, losing my keys, putting incorrect orders in at work, having to take them back over and over, and quite often losing my way driving home. It made me furious, made me beat my fists down on the legs that would refuse to move when I wanted to walk and yet would twitch, pedal, jerk like crazy all night long. My muscle locked up, and some mornings I was brought to tears just trying to roll over to get out of bed. I began adjusting to our lifestyle. Bought satin sheets because I could slide easier, and elastic waistpants and pullover sweatshirts so I wouldn't have to call Peter in and ask him to button me up. Used a cane and erupted in anger the one and only time Peter tried to get me to go to a doctor's. No, I never want to see another doctor again for as long as I live. Louise, he began. Don't tell me I'm being unreasonable, I said, crying because my head was moving again. I couldn't make it stop. I wanted a sip of orange juice, but couldn't make myself reach for the cup, and even if I did somehow manage to get a hold of it, would splash the juice right out. I'm just trying to help, he said quietly, watching me with a compassion that was both embarrassing and oh so welcome. The thing was, he couldn't help because I had already researched my symptoms and come up with a short, terrifying list of incurable diseases that would spin round and round in my mind every day and never let go. So I delved feverishly into home remedies, pored over organic cookbooks and homeopathic books and websites, found our old travel mugs and used them instead of normal cups so I could drink without spilling things, graduated to using a walker at home, and stopped driving, enabling us to sell my car and put the money toward what seemed like an ever-rising flood of bills. And I began to think about the end. Obsess about it, actually, remembering the Bames choosing to die of morphine overdoses rather than endure the continuing physical and neurological breakdowns from untreated syphilis, staring at my parents' photo, thinking of how it would have felt like to die like my father had at 21, blown up by an enemy's grenade, or my mother, growing weaker and sicker every day until without warning she had just expired. And I wondered, did she really have no warning? Had her body really not been telling her in its own silent way, with its breathlessness and weakness and pounding heart and constant sickness, that it was floundering? Had she known the truth and just decided not to acknowledge it, choosing instead to die with her secrets and leave her daughter shocked and alone, with no one to turn to for anything, not comfort or belonging or even answers? Had my mother deliberately chosen to ignore the dark cloud over her head, knowing my birth certificate would be discovered, knowing I would be devastated and would have anger and disappointment and so many questions, and just turn away from it all, perhaps unable to bear the way I would look at her, not always, but at that moment, full of betrayal and yes, maybe even brimming with the righteous disgust of the young who know they know everything, and just been too weak and weary to deal with it? And now I understood it, but at the same time I still hated it. I hated the lifelong frustration of questions without answers. I hated knowing that when I died and Peter died, and people we loved came to clean out our home, they too would find puzzling documents, that they too would try to match up dates and immigration records and make sense of a folder full of journalist reports. about mandatory sterilization in state orphanages and the rampage of syphilis and tuberculosis, and an old archived obituary of a woman named Evelyn Bell with an angry Clausen penciled in red after it, and a slimmer folder of horrible, grainy, black and white photos of the dead and dying during Holland's hunger winter, and a recipe for rice pie. And would anyone anywhere be able to guess the truth? Or would they just disregard it because we were gone now and who cared? Or even worse, would they just make up convenient truths to suit themselves, painting us as poor, uneducated liars, a sterilized bastard orphan, and a savage immigrant who would run off with a teenager? The thought was unbearable, leaving questions without answers, leaving loved ones to sort between the comforting lies and the shocking truth, so I sat down at the computer during the moments when my shaking wasn't too dreadful and began to write. "I think that's good for today, don't you?" I said, switching off the CD and avoiding Gran's gaze because I didn't like where the book was going now. Not at all, and wasn't it bad enough that she was stuck in the middle of it without having to hear about it in a book? Or was I wrong? Was it better to read books about people who were going through the same thing you were, just so you knew we're alone? I asked her, let the helpless question fall and lay there without an answer, watched her twist and writhe and drool, and she had started to drool now and needed changing every day, but I still couldn't do it, and when I told my mother crying, she said quietly, "With all that poor Helen is going through, I don't think the indignity of being changed is the worst of it." But the next time I went over, I found my mother there, and Gran was freshly washed and changed and wearing a clean sweatsuit, and her hair was brushed and her chapstick on. I started crying because I loved my mother for helping me, but I also saw all the things I hadn't done, and I realized how much I still didn't know about taking care of someone. Worse, my mother took me aside in a shaky voice and said, "It's no one's fault, Hannah, but I found 2 spots that look like they're going to be bed sores if we're not careful. And if she gets those, she's going to have to go back into the hospital because those are open wounds. And no, she hates doctors ever since the Bames," I blurted. And then had a weird woozy moment of trying to remember if it was Gran or Louise on tape who we were talking about. "Who are the Bames?" my mother said, frowning. "No one," I said, shaking my head and taking a deep breath, because that's not good, blurring the line between fantasy and reality. And I heard Seth's voice say, "You don't live in a novel, Hannah," and for a minute there I felt like I did. The question is not, can they reason or can they talk, but rather, can they suffer? Jeremy Bentham. How it ends. Parkinson's disease has no cure and no mercy. Over the time, the disease would steal my ability to swallow, to control my body, its functions and movements, to walk, turn my head, change expression, to think, to remember, to laugh and cry, and most heart-wrenchingly to talk. It would shut down my bowels, host Alzheimer's, and usher in depression. It would destroy my body and my mind, leaving me nothing but pain, terror, and a strong, beating heart trapped in a useless bed, sore-ridden shell. It could be stalled a while with drugs, but it could never be stopped. Research money was being divvied up and thrown around, but not enough, and not enough at Parkinson's. In the meantime, as if to prove its power, the disease stole my balance one fall afternoon and sent me reeling down the back steps. I couldn't get up, couldn't do anything but lie there, thrashing and gurgling. So Peter had no choice but to call the ambulance, had no choice but to place me in the hands of those I feared most. There's a lot I'm not saying about the sheer helplessness and frustration, the mortification of having to be wiped and diapered like an infant, of being unable to control yourself, of having to lay there in the hospital and have people touch you and move you and take your blood and give you pills and speak to you with the loud, perky, professional cheer of the whole and healthy, who know they will never end up like you simply because these things only happen to somebody else. The medication helped, giving me on and off times, welcome windows where I could rise and dress myself, where I could get the spoon in my mouth, and if the food was liquid enough, swallow it without choking. It gave me moments where I could talk one word, maybe 2 or 3, delivered seconds, sometimes minutes apart, and always in a nearly unintelligible mumble, but still it was a word that I'd spoken it. Not that anyone, Peter and a few others, ever had the patience to wait around long enough to hear what it was. The medication was expensive and wouldn't halt the slow, miserable disintegration. But I took it anyway. I took it and suffered the side effects because the doctor wanted me to, and I wanted more than anything to get out of that hospital and go home. So I took it and I did go home, and just the sight of our house rising through the trees past the bend in the road made me weep. When Peter helped me out of the car and showed me the wheelchair ramp the neighbor had built alongside the steps, when the cats crept out and the sun warmed my face, and the scent of the freshly moved clover hit me, I knew that no matter what, I would never willingly leave this place again. I had lived as I wanted to here, and I would die the same way. I'm afraid of this book. I want a happy ending. I want the book to finish and me and Gran to look at each other all pleased and maybe tearful, because books always makes you cry, and I want to hear her say something, just one word, and I don't care what it is, but I want to hear one word, just one, just one. My mother tried to keep Gran clean and out of the hospital, but she said it was a losing battle. The house was a mess, and the strain of trying to do it all was getting so bad that she was afraid Grandpa was going to have another heart attack. And what if that happened, she said one night at dinner, looking at my father and me with fear. If Lon has a heart attack, Helen can't even get to the phone. He could die lying there and waiting for help. What about one of those medical alarms, that I fall and can't get up thing? My father said, shoveling up a fork full of peas. I'm working again, and we could have the bill sent right to us. My mother looked at him, eyes swimming with tears, and said, that is exactly why I love you, you know that? And then she got up and went around and gave him a big bear hug. And knocked his glass of soda onto his plate, swamped his peas, and stained his mashed potatoes purple. He just smiled and hugged her back and didn't look like he cared at all. I didn't play the book on Thanksgiving, first because it didn't seem like anything to be thankful for, and second because my parents were there with me. We brought food over for Grandpa and pureed some sweet potatoes and stuff for Gran, but she was really, really bad, and it was a terrible day because we all knew that sooner or later one of us was going to have to tell him that she needed to be put somewhere, and that he couldn't give her what she needed anymore, no matter how hard he tried, and that caring for her was killing him, and we could see it happening. The worst part was that no one brought up it because we were all trying to be at least a little cheerful, but right after saying our Thanksgiving blessing, he looked up and said, her heart is very strong. She has no heart problems at all, and that was kind of scary because all I could think of was only, what if he dies of a heart attack because he's got the weak heart and leads her here? Are we going to have to put her in a home, or will someone just come and get her and commit her without anyone's permission at all? My mother came back with me Friday and Saturday, so while she changed the sheets on the bed, cleaned the bathroom, and washed Gran, I loaded up the wagon full of deer food and made the slow U around the back of the quiet property, caught in a thick tension headache, caught in a limbo with the world, feeling the last peaceful day was coming tomorrow, before deer season opened at sunrise on Monday, knowing the stalemate with Seth wouldn't go on forever, that we had all these words to say to each other, and neither of us would say them, that we were silent not because we couldn't talk, but because we wouldn't, and sick at what a waste it was. I went back to Gran's on Sunday by myself, not because of the mandatory community service, but because they needed me, and while I was busy filling Gran's sippy cup with water, I glanced up and saw a little faded red plastic tomato ornament hanging on a suction hook on the window. I made it for her back in 6th grade with a stained glass paint kit. The sight of it twisted hard inside me, ripped something loose, and I forgot about the sippy cup. Forgot about everything but Gran, and ran back into the living room where she was alone, slumped and shaking in the chair. Gran, I said, dropping to my knees in front of her and grabbing onto one of her flyaway hands. Don't leave me, okay, please? Her hand struggled in mine, but I wouldn't release it. Stay, Gran, I said, and I wanted it to be an order, and it came out as a plea. I need you, I do. I didn't even try to stop the tears. Who am I going to talk to if you go? You said you would never leave me, Gran. You said so. Please stay. I wanted her to look at me, to smile and pet my hair like she used to when I was little, but there was nothing. She gave me nothing. Finally, still crying, I let go of her hand, wiped my face on my sleeve, got up and hit play on the CD player. How it ends. I don't know how you say goodbye to whom and what you love. I don't know of a painless way to do it. Don't know the words to capture a heart so full and a longing so intense. I don't know how to ask you to understand that sometimes the most loving lies are necessary to protect the innocent. I started writing this because I love you, and it was time to give you truthful answers to all of those impossible questions you once asked. There will be more questions coming, there always are, and by that time I pray you will realize what a happy ending is not the same as happily ever after, and that fairy tales are fiction, but love, true love that is trustworthy, steadfast, and reliable is not. True love is real, and I have loved you since that first day, the best way I knew how. I hope someday you can forgive me. Peter found me some home daycare women for a while, volunteers from churches who mostly swept in with a determined good cheer and occasionally teeth-grinding platitudes about God's will and never being given more than we could bear. Cruelest when said as I changed my soiled diaper, or patted my back as I choked on a teaspoon of applesauce. And while I hated having strangers see me like this, wandering through my home looking at my things or rummaging through my bureau drawers, I was also desperately grateful because we could never have afforded to pay them, and caring for me was an exhausting job. I worried about the strain on Peter's heart. I worried about all the things I wanted to tell him in our golden years now that I couldn't form the words for it or even remember. I worried about the widowed volunteers, friendly, attractive ladies who made eyes at Peter while feeding him lunch and told him of wonderful senior citizen-sponsored bus trips into New York at Christmas to see the Rockettes or down to Atlantic City to gamble out to Pennsylvania Dutch country to mingle with the Amish. I would tremble with outrage when this happened, and my involuntary movements would grow agitated and spastic, and the nice volunteer would sigh and glance at Peter and say, "She's so lucky she has you," and bless his heart, he would reach over and take my spasming claw and say, "I've always been the lucky one." The volunteer would raise an eyebrow and say, "It's not every husband who would take on such a heavy burden," and then Peter, gaze gleaming, would release my hand and let it flail, inevitably knocking over my drink cup or sweeping my plate from the tray. The volunteer would hustle over to clean it up, and he would wink at me, and I would try to smile a frail and die a little more inside, because I knew what the volunteer said was true. My pills had no refills, without a follow-up visit, but I would not go back to the doctor because I knew the moment he saw me, he would either advise Peter to put me in a care facility or, if I looked bad enough, might even commit me himself. It might have been my terror-fueled imagination talking. It might never have actually happened, but if it did, I knew I would never get out again. Peter got the doctor to refill my medication once by phone anyway, lying and saying I'd knocked open the bottle into the toilet by mistake, but the doctor wouldn't do it again, so we were forced to begin cutting my pills in half to make them last longer, trying to stretch the time in between doses. The results were a hell I wouldn't wish on anyone. Fall came, the days cold and gray and bleak. Peter closed off all the rooms but the few we were using downstairs. He slept on the couch as we couldn't share a bed anymore and hadn't since I'd come home from the hospital. My involuntary thrashing had not only made it impossible for him to sleep, but also left him bruised and once with a bloody nose. Most days he managed to get me into the wheelchair and set me by the window so I could see the deer and the cats and all I'd once loved. But I had stopped caring, wrapped in endless pain and confusing thoughts and a great heavy weariness. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't tell him how sorry I was to have let him down like this, to be such a terrible burden and carved such deep anguish into his face, to never have said one last thank you for gently brushing my hair or washing me or shouting, only when the frustration of seeing me dying grew to be too much. I wished that I had whispered one last "I love you" while I still could, or asked him to sing me one last song, or could spend one last sweet night in his arms. I wished I could die in my sleep like my mother had wished. I had thought to gather medication while I still could drive and speak, while I could have visited several different doctors for enough different prescriptions to amass the correct and lethal doses, but still, that thought terrified me too, because what if I did manage to swallow enough pills? A gamble, because I could barely swallow it all, but didn't die. What if I just went into a coma and was committed to an institution and left to lie there, to languish for another 10 years? What if I ended up in worse shape than Miss Bame had been in? Because at least she was able to move and speak, at least she had been in her own home, in her own bed, and with her own husband when she passed. I was trapped, caught between a never wanting to leave and only wanting to leave, and being helpless either way. And at night, tormented by insomnia and claustrophobia, born of being unable to escape the tight constrictions of my own body, the smell of decay rose around me. There was no escaping that either. I watched the deer, the does, the yearlings, grazing in the back, and wanted to warn them that they're in mortal danger, that mothers will die and fawns become orphans, and nothing I can do or say will stop it or save them. I've tried to protect them, but I failed. Now, even in my writing, my voice will be still. Peter will FedEx this to the self-publishing company I've chosen. It will return as an audiobook, because so few people make time to curl up in a cozy chair and read anymore. When the questions come, and they will, you will have answers. I love you with all my heart, and I would not leave you as I was left. I waited, but nothing happened. No more narrator, no more words. I looked at Gran, but she was thrashing and offered no answers. Got up, grabbed the CD case, wrenched it open, searching for another CD, because there had to be another one. There had to be. There wasn't. No, I said, shaking my head, dropping the case and glancing around the room, searching for something to make sense of this. That can't be. No one ends a book like this. OMG, I can't believe it. That's it. Are you kidding? I was so freaked I didn't know what to do, so outraged and let down and full of pent-up anger at such a total betrayal. As some stupid writer who would draw me in and carry me along and make me love her and be anxious for her and want so bad for a happy ending. For a miracle, a JC, at least a comment about the end or an author's note or something, that I wasn't just left hanging going, well, what happened? Did she live? Did she die? What happened? And then when Grandpa finally got home, I was like, next time I'm picking the audiobook, okay? And it's going to be a nice, normal murder mystery because I can't take another book like this one. And he just smiled, slowly unbuckled his crossing guard vest, and watched as I gathered up the food for the cats and for the deer's last feast, and stomped out, and when I was halfway across the yard, he came out onto the porch and called, "Good night, Hannah." I stopped, still mad, caught up in all the infuriating unanswered questions the stupid book had left me with, yelled, "See you tomorrow," and just kept going. That book, I said to my mother at supper, forget it. It has no ending. It has to have an ending, she said, looking puzzled. Everything has an ending. Yeah, well, not this, I said crinkly. It's a stalemate, okay? It leaves you in total limbo with no answers, and what am I supposed to do? Imagine what happens? I scowled down at my burrito and felt myself cracking. Hannah, she said worriedly, just don't read it, I managed to say and waved her away and went on scowling down at my fried beans because I had a pounding headache. And I started wishing Crystal's brother was still throwing parties because all I wanted to do was wipe my mind clean and just be happy with Seth and not caught in this horrible bleak cycle where death was coming as soon as the sun rose again. I googled Louise Bell Clausen, got nothing. Went to Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble and Borders and Books A Million and every indie bookstore I could think of looking for her, or in case I spelled her name wrong, How It Ends, and got so mad even typing in the title that I just shut the computer down and went to bed. I didn't sleep for a long time that night. All that remains. Sounds. The finches squabbling in the pine tree, made anxious by the empty bird feeders, lawn whispering a promise, the constant rhythmic swish of dry skin slitting across worn satin sheets, sights, the deer grazing out back along the path, their rich, tawny summer coats faded to the gray-brown of dead foliage, a prescription bottle marked no refills, the truth confessed entitled How It Ends in its case on the table, smells, the comforting drift of evening in Paris furled in grief, Lon's dependable Lipton tea with honey and lemon exhales, the earthy, sun-baked straw scent of the shy, scrawny stray cats in for a visit, sensations, Lon's calloused hands fumbling a damp nylon nightgown up over my head and cool wash of air that follows, a thigh muscle seized in a rigid, trembling cramp, choking, trying to swallow the lukewarm trickle pulled at the back of my throat, emotions, relief like a silver ribbon of promise, winding through a razor-thorn maze of despair, a merciless yearning for what was and never will be again. Terror, a smothering black hood, stitched to a body bag zipped up, locked down, and nearly sewn shut. Chapter 31, Hannah. My alarm goes off before sunrise. I roll over, wincing as remnants of last night's headache throb to life. God, I whisper, peeling back the covers and stumbling out of bed. I feel awful, thick and foggy, grim with a vague, low-level dread, like a lingering nightmare, and I pause frowning, trying to figure out why, and then I remember, it's opening day. I plod into the bathroom to get ready for school. A dull throb stays with me as I go downstairs. My stomach is roiling and something's wrong, something past the headache and the tension of hunting season, but I can't pull it out of the fog, so I grab 2 aspirin, sit down at the table across from my mother, who's already well into her second cup of coffee. Happy days are here again, she says grimly, and hands me the ugly pink fluorescent knit hat we'll both wear from now on whenever we go outside. Joy, I said, pull it out, and go over to the counter to pour a bowl of cereal. Pause, gaze out the window over the sink, because there's a light on over at Grand's, and the ribbon of dawn is just beginning to thread through the trees. Lon Schoenmaker finishes the first cup of caffeinated coffee he's had since his original heart attack so many years ago and rises, wincing at his arthritis. He sets the cup in the sink and goes to the table in the living room, where a thick envelope of documents awaits. He withdraws his will and then Helen's and lays them out on the table next to the deed of the house, a life insurance policy, their birth certificates, and last a post-it note. He picks up How It Ends, fastens the post-it note to the front of the shiny red CD case, and sets it out on the back porch, straightens, a hand at his back, and stands a moment breathing in the crisp air, the faint scent of the wood smoke, the rich beauty of all the loves. He looks at the thin strip of daylight glowing through the bare tree branches, turns, goes in, locks the door behind him. I don't know why I'm pouring cereal, because I'm not even hungry, but I need something in my stomach to take these aspirin, so I pour the milk and my stomach is sick. My head is pounding, and out of the corner of the window, over on the land next door, I see a hunter. Flashlight and fluorescent hat bobbing as he weaves through the trees, and I could just cry because dawn is coming and the doe are out there, like they always are, grazing, living, standing with their yearlings, just trying to make it through. They don't even know that death is on the march. Lon walks into the bedroom, stops at the edge of the bed, looks down at Helen, wide awake, trembling, twitching, head and neck, hands and arms, legs and feet twisting and writhing, unable to stop, her mouth moving without words. As he leans over, touches her face, strokes her cheek, and she sees him. She knows him. Because her eyes fill with tears, her gaze clings to his, terrified but trusting him, the way she's always trusted him to be there, to never leave her, and he won't. He takes the Ciro's nightclub souvenir photo from the end table, shows it to her, and when he's sure she's seen it, smiles and lays it on the pillow beside her. Your medication's gone, Helen. There is no more. He says this quietly and watches her closely, sees the awareness in her gaze, the fear and the acceptance, and finally the relief. He strokes her hair back as best he can because she's moving so violently and says, No more, I promise. I'll be right behind you. And then he rises and goes to the closet and pulls out the shotgun that has never been fired, and like the gunsmith's son he began as, He opens the box of shells and loads it. The hunter's in the field next door, I say to my mother, dropping into my seat and toying with the now soggy cereal. I force myself to eat a spoonful because otherwise the aspirin will kill my stomach. It's going to be an ambush. Lon shuts poor bewildered Sarepta in the bathroom, stands at the side of the bed gazing at Helen, seeing not the wreckage Parkinson's has wrought, but the woman he's loved most of his life, a sweet, strong, doe-eyed 16-year-old girl, a graceful young woman who went off to waitress and who would turn, cheeks pink and gaze shining, as he stood on the porch seeing her way, wooing her back, as so she tries to sing the memories come, tries to sing her one last love song. But the only one he can think of is all things must pass, and sees the tears slip from her eyes, sees her in his memory, dancing light and lovely in her slip, luring him with a smile like sunshine and unashamed, unreserved love into her arms, a woman who sprayed him with the hose and ran shrieking when he chased her straight into the pond, a woman who held his hands to her lips when he said he would never stay without her, and that he would take a bullet for her, and that he would never ever leave her, and he whispers the words, "I will always love you," and lays a hand on her cheek, and she gazes at him, trusting, waiting. I get to put my bowl in the sink. It's almost on. I stare into the dark field that won't see the hat. No, there it is, settled in the branches of a tree stand. OMG, my head. Lon takes a steadying breath because he has no fear now. He has always done what he had to be done, to love her and save her, to save himself the way he couldn't save his parents. The memory of all that came before this moment mixes with the sweet life that is almost over, and he draws one more ragged breath, stiffening his resolve, and puts the barrel to her forehead, but the forehead keeps moving, jerking, shaking, and he can't get a clean shot, so he can't pull the trigger without her moving. Because if he misses, no, he can't miss, because this is their agreement. They would not be put away to die long and slow and ugly. They would go as they lived, their own way in their own home, so he can't miss, but he can't get a good shot if she won't stop moving, so he turns the shotgun, lifts it high, and smashes it down on her forehead. And she stops moving then, and sobbing he turns the shotgun and presses it to her forehead and pulls the trigger. The deer lift their heads. The shot explodes in the silence and I jump, dropping my bowl to the sink. My mother snorts and says, "Well, somebody just jumped the gun and scared all the deer away. There's going to be a lot of peed-off hunters out there this morning." And my heart surges and my brain pounds, and all of a sudden I know, and I make a high desperate noise and scramble across the kitchen, fumble at the door, fling it wide, and bolt out into the burning cold. I'm running and it's almost dawn, but not yet, and the light is murky gray mixed with pink, and I hear my mother behind me yelling, "Hannah, no, what are you doing?" Lon Schonmaker's legs give out and he sinks to the edge of the bed, next to his wife's still form, turns the shotgun on himself, and closing his eyes fires. The second shot explodes and it's there, right there, closing in my ears and my heart, and I stumble ragged with terror, running as hard as I can through the break in the little woods, and I can hear the deer running too, crashing into the woods all around me, and the guy in the tree yells, "What the F?" I run past the empty bird feeders and the cats streaking everywhere, and finally, panting and half blind with tears, take the back porch steps on my hands and knees, see a CD near the door with a post-it with my name on it, and grab it. Hannah. This is how and why. All our love. Helen Louise Bell Clausen Schoenmaker. Lon Peter Schoenmaker. I stare at it, incredulous, and then a wordless wail grates from my throat like a rush of ground glass, leaving 1,000 little cuts in its wake. I shove the CD into my hoodie pocket, push myself up, grab the doorknob, but it's locked. So I stumble to the window, and the shade is down, but the light is on inside and frantic. I smear my cloudy breath from the glass and look harder, squint harder. And no. The back away, keening, holding my stomach, clutching at the railing. My mother runs up in her bedroom slippers, and I cry, "Mom, Mom," and I reach for her, and she's there. The police and the ambulance come with sirens wailing, and the sun rises, and the deer run out, scattered to the winds, and no does or yearlings die here today, the only day in her life that Gran can finally be able to save them. One faces the future with one's past. Pearl S. Buck. I didn't tell anyone about how it ends. I don't know whether I actually forgot about it amid the shock or what. I really don't. The newspapers screamed senior citizen murder/suicide, and all these people who didn't even know Gran or Grandpa spoke to the press, presenting all kinds of stupid half-theories, and the papers printed them, and people went online and asked, how could this happen in our community? Like being private was unforgivable sin, and they should have advertised their intentions so they could have been deemed incompetent and put in a nursing home or under immediate psychiatric evaluation. Others talked about how Gran had just believed in God strongly enough, or decided there must have been abuse in the home, because otherwise she would have been in a care facility like she should have done, and on and on. Only one person was brave enough to say that if, like Oregon, the state allowed for physician-assisted suicides, and instead of being forced to resort to extreme measures for lack of options, Gran would have been able to pass away with dignity. To go gently and peacefully surrounded by loved ones, not miserable, desperate, and smashed to pieces. The person who suggested it was roundly condemned, and never returned to newspaper's message board to respond because really, what would have been the point? Everyone believes what they want to believe. The police had to keep watch on the house because there were actually ghouls who came to stare at it, people who wanted to see where the murderer and the helpless victim had spent their days, trespassers who wanted to walk the grounds and peer in the windows and see if they could identify what caused the snap so they could avoid it themselves, but I knew they would never find it because they were only looking on the outside. And the answers, all of them, came from the inside. The past, present, and future, the imprints, decisions, experiences, the parts of us that we hold secret and dear, the pieces that no one will ever know unless we make a point of revealing them. Someday, when all of this is over, I'm going to give my mother the audiobook so she'll have the real answers too. 3 times so far, my mother has opened the front door and stood behind the glass door, watching me, eyes red and lids swollen from crying. Fingers knotted together, the pain of the last 2 days forever stamped in the lines on her face. 3 times she slipped out of the house, crossed the porch to the railing, where I'm sitting with my back against the post, touched my jacketed arm, and said, "Hannah, are you sure you don't want to come inside and wait? It's so cold, and you're not even sure he's coming." And 3 times I've shaken my head, short, quick, full-body, trembling shakes that are an extension of the bone-deep shuddering that hasn't stopped ever since I raced through the pre-dawn chaos. He'll come. I clench my jaw to keep my teeth from chattering, curl my fingers up tight inside the thick, white crocheted mittens, and gaze down across the acre of flattened, frozen grass toward the road beyond, waiting. Because he will come. I know it. All I have to do is wait long enough. "Have you called him?" my mother asked him this last time. "No," I said, "because it's important, somehow, that I don't have to. It's important that he finds Sammy in the halls and asks how I am, and when he hears the truth, all else falls away and he comes. It's important that I don't have to ask. He has to do it soon, though, simply because he loves me, and I need him, and because I'm huddled here, wrecked and broken. And the wake is tonight, and people will come to stare and question and whisper, and he'll know that standing beside me will mean everything. So I wait for him because I always have. Because out of all the moments that went wrong, I think there were just as many that went right, just as much love and hate and want as hurt, disappointment, and cruelty. I want to believe that there's a balance here, that out of this tragedy will come some good, and there will be a happy ending. And most of all, for all the times he's told me, "Get your head out of a book, Hannah. You don't live in a novel." I want him to show him that yes, I know all too well that real life is not fiction. My parents stand together at the front of the crowded wake. My father looks weary, defeated, and my mother's eyes red, the lashes wet and spiky. It's like a wounded sentinel, dazed by the sudden ferocity of death and the deluge of unanswered questions, but still standing with chin up and gaze fierce, determined to protect Gran and Grandpa from the flood of bright-eyed, stale-breathed mourners who cheaped out on flowers, but still came to feed on the shocked tragedy, gossip, and judge. "I heard he had an arsenal in his cellar. Do you think he really kept her tied to the bed? I want to know what they were doing with all those cats. I can't believe no one knew." And then they turn and look at me, but I keep my gaze fixed on the sparse scattering of floral arrangements standing behind the urns and give them nothing, because this bone-deep ache is mine. The only thing I say when people bait me with comments like, "I can't believe this happened," is, anybody who really knew them knew that he would never stay without her. But it's like they don't want to believe in a love that strong and a happily ever after that deviates from the fairy tale, and so they keep fishing for answers they will never get. Sammy, Crystal, and their families come. Grandpa's old supervisor from the railroad comes, and so does an elderly lady named Coral. People from my parents' work come, and Mr. Sung from school comes. Seth does not. And it's in the last half hour, when I'm exhausted and close to tears, heart sore from gazing at the urns and wishing, oh God, praying this is all just a horrible nightmare, that I glance up and see Jesse standing in the back looking solemn, dreads in a ponytail, carrying a jacket over his arm and wearing a long-sleeved white dress shirt, so new that it still has the fold lines down the front. I almost break then, I do, but instead I meet his dark, steady gaze and make my way to him, take his hand, bring him forward and introduce him to my parents, and in that space surrounded by loss and sadness and the passing of something real and good and true, something else real and good and true is passed on too, seated with a moment of pain that could someday become a pearl. Winter. I huddle on the back steps, knees drawn up, hands in my pockets and toes numb from the creeping cold, watching the birds gathered at the feeders, cardinals and chickadees mingling with wrens, blue jays, doves, all picking at the seeds spread across the frigid January ground. A shadow passes and I glance up, growing uneasy as the birds continue to feed, oblivious to a thin black slash in the sky that's coming closer, looming larger, sharpening into strong wings and a curved beak, circling unnoticed over the peaceful scene below. It veers out of sight as I exhale. The birds of the feeders explode in a flurry, hurtling into the air as the hawk bullets in. They scatter, frenzied, panicked, streaking towards me, hitting the false sky reflected in the window with a dull, solid thuds, and falling broken to the leaves below. The hawk, fierce, beautiful, inevitable, plumage dark and shining iridescent lance, and stands motionless, ignoring the feeble fluttering of the dove trapped in its talons. I watch paralyzed as the dove's twisted wings flap uselessly against its captor. Hear the triumphant keen as the hawk surveys its domain, then dips its head to peck, tear, peck. And then there's no sound at all but my own mindless, have mercy, you took it, now kill it, don't make it suffer. When the numbing fog inside me finally burns away and I'm close to screaming, and the hawk tenses, spreads its wings, and with the limp body caught firmly in its grip carries it off. The feeders sway abandoned, buff-colored feathers torn loose and stained bright ripple twitch in its wake. Trembling, I rise and search for survivors. At first I see nothing but casualties. 4 sparrows that were never the targets but still felt the course of the assault. Then I spot the 5th bird. A wren lying beneath the window on a drift of matted leaves. It blinks, quivering but still too stunned from the shock of impact to fly. I crouch, weeping, and gently close my hand around it, absorbing the residual terror fueling in its tiny heart. Cradle it close for a moment, then place it on one of the stray cat towels in a warped and weathered shoebox, close the lid, put the makeshift sanctuary on the step, and return to bury the dead. The strays, however, always hungry, always prowling, have already discovered the small cooling bodies and carried them away. The relief that comes from this shames me, but I'm still thankful because the birds who died quickly have not only been spared, but have spared me the struggles of the mortally wounded. I'm kneeling helpless beside a body too broken to fly, but not broken enough to die, beside living wreckage that cannot be healed and would never again be more than a twisted, flightless song, trapped on the ground alone, defenseless and forsaken by its own kind. And so I wait in the chill of the thin gray light until the tears dry. The lost has been mourned and the hawk forgiven, and then return to the porch, open my jacket, tuck the shoebox in close against me to warm it. Not speaking, not lifting the lid to see if the little wren is still breathing, just waiting while the faint flutter of a single taken dove ripples through me again and again, just waiting, keeping quiet, watch over the wren at the bottom of the shoebox, and wondering if it will ever recover enough to be released. Where is home? Home is where the heart can laugh without shyness. Home is where the heart's tears can dry at their own pace. Vernon Baker. Ever after. I walked through the little woods, Sarepta at my heels, and together we traveled the deer path and the old wooden bench under the catalpa tree, sit in the shade of those generous heart-shaped leaves and breathe in the scent of the delicate white flowers. It is impossibly beautiful. Sarepta, not slow and arthritic, gathers herself and leaps up to settle beside me. Birds, robins, sparrows, wrens, maybe even the one I know, flit through the meadow grass. And a worn, raggedy monarch, perhaps the first to return from the winter migration, flutters past us and along the woodline into the sun. It's fawn season, too. There are hoofprints in the mud along the pond's edge, and for a heartbeat I think I hear you whisper, "Wild horses, Hannah." I know it's only the sweet breeze rustling through the catalpa, but today, on my 18th birthday, I very much want to believe it's you, because this morning I discovered you left me everything you ever loved. I lift my head, listening to the faint sound of a motorcycle in the distance. It's a Harley. It has a very distinctive sound, and it's headed my way. I smile and wipe my damp cheeks on my sleeves, lift Sarepta up into my arms, cradling her close, rise and start backing along the deer path. Wild horses, Gran, I miss you so much. Thank you for listening to How It Ends by Laura Wiess. I've read this book, I don't know how many times, quite a few times, and it's one of those books where it's like certain things about it bother me more as I get older than they did when I was younger. Like, honestly, the romance between her and the one character, Jesse, it doesn't really, I mean, it's kind of left open and everything. It's like you do see how she believes that he's genuine, and she kind of, in her innocence or purity, she seems to think he's genuine, and maybe he is, and maybe he'll prove that he is. But still, there's just a little thing about it where it's like, it does almost seem like it's kind of, like there are little things here that sort of seem like, potential warning signs here and there. But I shouldn't say that. Anyway, it's an important book, but I don't really want to keep it anymore. Just being honest. Let me know if there were any parts you liked about it. Thank you for listening.